One Piece has always had its fair share of mysteries, and many readers try to put together their own solid theories in order to crack the codes left behind by Oda. Some of these mysteries have to do with events from the past, the present, and even the very far future. The one I plan on talking about today revolves around all three, and how a location that was said to be long gone since the Void Century has and still is around to this very day. History may try to fool us, but I can say with a certain resolve that the Ancient Kingdom was here the whole time. Let's go. Back in the Enies Lobby arc during Robin's flashback, we learned of the Ancient Kingdom and how the individuals associated with them were seen as the ruling country long ago in the distant past, as well as being the sworn enemies of the 20 kings who later on formed the world government. It was also stated by Professor Clover that the location of the Ancient Kingdom was erased from existence by the end of the Void Century. Now, while the information Professor Clover possesses could be the truth given his research of the poneglyphs over the course of his life, there is still the possibility that the Ancient Kingdom might not be gone entirely. Instead, it's in a location we've known all about this entire time. To build up to what it is, and the evidence to support this possibility of the Ancient Kingdom still existing, let's look at what Professor Clover said in his own words when discussing about the Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, and the supposed threat that they possess that would threaten the world, as well as the other information we've obtained about the Void Century over the course of the story. The Ancient Kingdom was said to be a vast and powerful nation around 900 years ago. Any and all mentions of their existence has been erased, while even its name remains a secret to this day. Key figures who have had roles to play during the events of the Void Century, and potentially with the Ancient Kingdom, include the clan of D, the Celestial Dragons, Joy Boy, and Im. Whilst Toki was born during the Void Century, we almost have no info to go on with her involvement in those events during that period of time. After the demise of the Ancient Kingdom, 19 of the 20 kings proceeded to immigrate over to Mary Joie, whereas the Nefertari family were the only ones to reject residence into the Holy Land. Thus, the world government was established and has stood in power for over 800 years. Going into the main point of this discussion as to where the location of the Ancient Kingdom is, yes, Professor Clover said it's been destroyed long ago, but that's from the perspective of someone from an era long after the Void Century. The only people who know of what happened in the distant past and are currently alive are those who hold critical information or are aware of what happened in that time period through means that are still unknown to us readers. This includes the Gorosei, the Celestial Dragons, and Im from inside the world government. Speculation amongst us fans believe that Dragon has knowledge of the Void Century, which could be one of his reasons for creating the Revolutionary Army. Members of the Navy in the higher ranks could also have intel of the details pertaining to this as well. People like Kong, the former fleet admiral during Roger's era, Sengoku, the previous fleet admiral, Akainu, the current fleet admiral, and the hero of the Navy, Monkey D. Garp. Garp is a given to know details of the distant past given his connection to Goldie Roger and their encounter with Zebek on God Valley. And even if it's not the literal truth, his lineage as a member of the D family tells me he possesses enough intel to know the bare minimum of what occurred during that period of time. What I'm trying to get at is that unless you yourself are from that era or are heavily affiliated with what occurred during the Void Century, or in the case of Professor Clover who had learned critical details of the Ancient Kingdom, any and all news about the Void Century from outside the circle of individuals I listed is seen pretty much as speculation at best. Sticking with the world government and in particular Mary Joie, some studying I've done pertaining to Holy Land brought up something interesting that I wanted to share. As myself and many others have called the Holy Land Mary Joie for a long time, it wasn't until recently that the Reverie arc where Oda had flipped its name to Mary Joise. In Irish, the word Joise means jealousy. Joise could also be used as an allusion to the word bourgeoisie. In its original sense, the word was used to refer to the privileged ones that lived inside a walled city. On the other hand, however, the ones living outside the walls of the city were considered as peasants. Today it is applied to the ruling class with wealth, while the proletarians are viewed as commoners. I found these to be interesting for many different reasons. The theme of jealousy is something I view as a characteristic for the world government and the Celestial Dragons. You would think that they have the least reasons to be jealous since they are the ones that are living in royalty while the rest of the world is viewed as scum and live in poverty. And the ones that are more fortunate, to a slighter extent, have to pay a tribute to the Celestial Dragons for protection to avoid becoming like what we saw in Whitebeard's past with his homeland. The world government and in particular the Celestial Dragons are in fact jealous of one thing: freedom. Those outside of the Holy Land aren't bound by their family lineage or royal status. They can do whatever it is that they please for good and bad. To them, the world government and Celestial Dragons are trying to gain a chokehold of their enemies so that they are the only ones allowed to flourish in happiness and prosperity. But what could be the actual origin of that jealousy? That trait of envy is born within all humans, yet in this case scenario, we have actual royalty who are still not happy that they don't have a full control of everything in their power. That jealousy comes from one place or one group and that is their sworn enemies, the family of D. Speculation and evidence in the story suggests that the family of D were the residents or the former owners of the ancient kingdom. The celestial dragons view them as the natural enemy of God, whilst they themselves view one another as gods. Now, while it's been stated that nothing exists of the ancient kingdom today, what if that isn't really the case? Archaeologists all over the world for centuries have been able to discover traces of what used to be either civilization, ruins, or relics that belong to the distant past. While it's stated through Professor Clover that the ancient kingdom no longer exists, that's only from what he's read from some of the poneglyphs that the Oharians were able to find over time. That doesn't officially eliminate the possibility that it still exists, but its whereabouts are unknown to anyone that wasn't from that time period. However, after looking at the elements that could play relative to the ancient kingdom's true location, I had to step into the perspective of someone from the opposition side, the Celestial Dragons. We've been told from Leo and Dressrosa that the Don Quixote family were the original rulers of the island before the Void Century. After the Great Kingdom was defeated, they left for Mary Joie whilst the Riku family took over in their stead. Think about the mindset of the Celestial Dragons for a moment. They are despicable, unforgiving, vile, chaotic, sadistic, and just about any other word in the Webster's dictionary that classifies them as evil. If I am the manifestation of that group, or a person within that group, and I've just defeated my arch enemy, am I going to destroy everything that they have to mock them? No. Instead, I want to do things far worse than simply erasing something via destroying it. I renovate it, I strip it down of what made that place special, and paint it in my own colors and ideals and likeliness that bring shame to its former rulers out of spite. Instead of erasing it, they rebuilt it into their own territory. What I'm trying to say is that the ancient kingdom still in fact exists in the place we've known about this entire time, the Holy Land of Mary Joie. Let's use some of the elements found in Mary Joie through what I brought up earlier and what's currently in the Holy Land that supports this possibility of the ancient kingdom's former residents being the current home of the world government and the Celestial Dragons. The first piece of evidence that lies within a building we saw back in Jaya and learned of its name in the Reverie arc called Pangaea Castle. Pangaea was a supercontinent that existed 335 million years ago that united all the continents as one land. In a sense, it is viewed as the origin of all. Inside of Pangaea Castle lies the national treasure of the Celestial Dragons, which is said that if anyone were to obtain it, they could be able to rule the entire world. If such a thing does exist, it would make sense that instead of moving it into another location, they would make it into their own territory and hide it using their ulterior as a cover-up. Especially when you consider what we saw inside the freezing vault, whether it was within Pangaea Castle or another location within Mary Joie, of the giant straw hat that Im was in front of back in chapter 906. The significant value of this hat has yet to be determined, but we can say the chances of it being linked to the ancient kingdom or the family of D is quite high. For this to be stowed away in a place like that to be preserved what could have been for hundreds of years, it would be wiser to cover up the old layouts of the ancient kingdom on the outside while keeping some of the top secret stuff on the inside for those affiliated with the world government. To preserve something from going bad or expiring, freezing it is an option to maintain the state of an item for a long period of time. For the world government and Im to have the straw hat held in a vault, it could be possible that it's been locked away for hundreds of years for reasons unknown to us readers. And speaking of Im, isn't it funny how we've only just gotten their introduction to the story after like 900 plus chapters? If we think back on the few times that Im was hinted at during post Marineford with Doflamingo and Moria, to the end of Dressrosa with Akainu and the Gorosei, it's quite likely that if Im is in fact the last known being from the era of the Void Century, withholding them from the public eye is of top priority to the world government, to not only safeguard the national treasure, but the true ruler of the world who may actually be someone who has lived since the days of the Void Century. Doflamingo was aware of what this national treasure is, and whether or not you believe it's a straw hat or something else, it caused enough fear in the Celestial Dragons to which they had no choice but to comply with him to prevent this secret from being leaked to the world. Sticking with Mary Joie, there was a room inside Pangaea Castle that we saw Im residing in before meeting the Gorosei. This room was called the Chamber of Flowers, and as the name says, it is a very flowery scenery filled with life from butterflies, flowers, and trees, etc. One noticeable detail about this room was the moss that was stuck to the walls of the room. While moss only has a lifespan about 10 years, it is seen as a common factor that affiliates with areas or structures that have been around for a long period of time. Considering that this room is in the upper echelon of Pangaea Castle away from the vast majority of the world government, save for maybe the Gorosei, you can easily understand that Im's existence is something they don't want to be revealed to the world. And last but not least, there is one area within Pangaea Castle that holds importance to my belief that Mary Joie is in fact formerly the home of the ancient kingdom. That place, or should I say that object, is the empty throne. The empty throne has existed since the void century, at least 800 to 900 years before the present time in the story. It is said that no one is allowed to sit on it, as its vacancy symbolizes that the world is not ruled by a single figure, a way of sending a message of peace by making all royals equal before the throne, that nobody is greater or lesser than the other. We also see a line of weapons across 2 floors leading up to the throne. The ones right in front of the throne are said to be the relics from the previous 20 kings that took part in the destruction of the ancient kingdom. Let's take a step back and think about this for a moment. We already know the world government lied about the throne's vacancy the very second that Im sat on it. The organization that has been known in the past and present for fabricating the truth as much as possible to paint themselves in a good light. If my belief that Mary Jawad was built on top of the ancient kingdom is true, this room without question never belonged to Im in the first place. Instead, the throne belongs to the previous ruler of the ancient kingdom. That person could also be the one who was in possession of the massive straw hat in the vault we saw back in chapter 906. And whether you believe it to be Joy Boy, whomever it else, is still for debate until the answer is definitive. The swords that we see there could have also belonged to members of the family of D that fought against the world government before dying at their hands. And going back to what I said earlier, in a way to mock them, the celestial dragons dug their enemies' blades at the feet of the throne to signal their victory against them in the Great War 900 years ago. In the end, this is what we know going over what we talked about in this video. We know that the empty throne is placed at the center of the world. The empty throne is inside of Pangaea Castle. Pangaea is the name that represents the origin of the world. You see the pattern that's being formed? This all leads me to believe that the ancient kingdom that was said to be destroyed was instead built on top of by the celestial dragons and turned into the Mary Jawad we know of today. The poneglyphs are the only artifacts that can inform us of what occurred during the Void Century. So far we have Robin and allegedly the members of the Three-Eyed Tribe who can decipher them, and given that we are on Wano, the origin of the poneglyphs, they could tell us some important details about the Void Century as well as what happened to the ancient kingdom and the family of D. So those are pretty much my thoughts in regards to the ancient kingdom and where I truly believe its current location is right now, but it is in fact Mary Jawad itself rebuilt upon by the celestial dragons in spite of the family of D. But let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think about this entire thing. Do you believe in any of the things that I brought up in this video? Do you have your own ideas and theories that differ from my own? Let me know down in the comments. Like the video if you enjoy, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new here. If you want to be part of the weekly experience when it comes to my coverage of One Piece week in and week out, subscribe if you haven't already. Click on the bell of Shandora to stay up to date with everything that goes on the channel. With that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video. Commodore last signing off. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care. Going crazy, yeah, we going crazy.